Following on from the research access and research ethics, this presentation is on sampling for your primary research. So obviously in the research access, we have discussed the access to organizations and the access to the individuals that involved in your primary research. Yeah. And obviously having got to know who you need to contact for access, and then you considered all the ethics guidelines and applied for your ethics application for your primary research. And now you have to think about, who do you contact and how many you would need to invite for your research and how. Okay, so all these kind of the people involved in your research or the participants involved in your research in terms of how many, how you invite them to your research is called sampling method. It's the tools, techniques you used to choose the sample for your research. And that, as this figure indicated, sampling, the method to select your samples for your research is part of the data collection process. And obviously, as part of the research design, sampling method is a very important factor, should be considered as part of your research design or plan. Okay, similar as the access and ethics issues. So what does the term sampling mean to you? So obviously sampling is about the people who you want to study as part of your research, yeah? And obviously you can't study everybody that might be relevant to your research. Therefore, you need a particular sampling and then to choose the particular samples or representatives of the group of people that is relevant to your research. Okay, so therefore the term sampling is referred as a specific principle or procedure that is used to select the members population that to be included in study. Sampling is actually the process of procedure, yeah, and the principles you use to select the selective number of participants that is related to your study. Okay, and obviously the process of selecting a few from a bigger group to become the basis, forms part of your research. And a sampling, another concept discussed, is the process of taking parts from a defined population in order to examine those parts, usually with the aim of making judgment about the parts of the population that haven't been investigated. And obviously, hopefully, the samples you choose and in the process of sampling are representative, as we mentioned, and so you can make judgment to kind of make generalizations. The concept of sampling is related to a few important terminologies. So the first one is called population. Population is the full set of cases or individuals that are relevant to your research that helps you to answer the research question. But normally, you would not include or invite the whole population to your research, but rather you would get into a smaller set of cases, a population. So that comes to the sample. Sample is the subset of the population. So which means it's a smaller number of the population, yeah? But the sample and the subset of the population must be representative to the entire population that you want to study. Okay, so although you could not investigate the whole population, but you choose the sample which are representative to others, yeah? And then the case or element, which is also knowing the subject or participant, is referring to the individuals that your research is going to invite to take part in your research. So another important concept related to sampling is called sampling frame. So as a frame, it is the complete list of all the cases in the population of interest to your research. And it is the basis by which respondents or participants are selected. So for example, if you want to do a research within a particular region, for example, and you may want to look into the postcode, yeah? And then obviously you may be able to find the postal address files useful as a public, secondary, publicly available, open access secondary data. So that means it's the complete list of all the people, household live in this region or area. Okay, but obviously that's the sampling frame. It is the basis in which the participants of the household is selected. Yeah, so based on the postal address file. And obviously within this postal address file, it might contain all the population that that your research is concerned, but you would select a subset of all the population, which is the sample. So you will select a number of samples from that region and from this postal address file. Okay, instead of reaching out to all the households within that particular region. So this image is a clear representation of the concept population, sample, and case or element. Yeah. So as we see, the population could be the whole, the whole representation of the cases. But you have a target population, and which is in the middle, and the samples are the specific subsets of the population. Yeah. And all these little stars can be seen as the individual case or individual subject or participant of your research. Yeah, so in which case it could be the household, as we mentioned. Yeah, so if we talk about the sampling frame, for example, so if we see the whole population and all these stars regarded as all the households in a particular region, within the postal address file, and you have your target population, and then you may focus on some of them, and then in the very inner, the sample. So you would choose some of them, a subset of the target population, instead of looking, reaching out to all the households, all the stars. Yeah. So another image, which is another clear representation of the relationship between population and sample. So you have it's kind of a more clearly divided by population, target population, and the accessible population, and then the samples. And then the very individuals, the individuals that involved in your research are known as the case subject or research participant. So why do people or researchers have to use sampling? Because of the advantages of sampling, yeah, and because it's not possible sometimes or practical just to research the whole population, isn't it? And thinking about the time and the cost it might involve. And then by choosing the right sample, which as we mentioned, representative samples of the whole population, it makes the research manageable within a given time. Yeah, and save the cost and time financial constraints can be prevented as well. So meanwhile, it is important to note that the term population we're referring to in your research is not the whole population as a whole, because as you remember at the very beginning of this course, we talked about SMART research title or research question. Yeah, so your research should be specific within a particular academic subject, within a particular context, which could be the industry sector or particular kind of organization or product line or target population. Okay, so therefore, the population we're referring to is always within a particular context, so which we say target population. Okay, so your target populations really depends on the context of your research. It could be, as we mentioned, a particular industry or sector. All right, or it could be a particular kind of organization based on the type. It's a private, public sector, or B2C, B2B, or national or multinational kind of organizations. Okay, so this should be specified in the title of your research question. And it could be the organizations within a specific geographical area. Could be the headquarters based in London, for example, or could be in East London, where with the postcode of SE, Southeast, for example. Yeah, or you could, your context could be based on the size of the organization, small enterprise or small medium enterprises or multinational organizations, or could be based on the organization's annual turnover or number of employees. Yeah, and also it could be based on the type of services experience of the organization. For example, organizations involved in initial public offering on the stock market, for example, in the last financial year. Or it could be based on the department office in a particular organization within with reference to particular job titles or role responsibilities of the particular employees. For example, you may look into the customer service department, for example, of organization. Okay, so obviously the population we're referring to are the target population, as we mentioned, and within a particular context. Okay, so the context of your research may not necessarily be based on an overall kind of industry or sector, or not necessarily based on organizations or type of organizations we mentioned earlier. It could be your research is based on a particular target group of people. For example, it could be target population based on experience. For example, you may look into research based on line managers or general employees or customer service kind of a staff members. Yeah, and it could be the kind of a target population based on a particular geographical area, as we mentioned, the household within a particular, postal code or particular telephone code area, okay? Or it could be based on simply the demographic profile, so the kind of age, sex, social class, or presence of children, as we mentioned before as well. It could be investigating into female employees with a family, for example. Yeah, how do they balance, life and work during the lockdown, for example. And you could also look into the particular target population based on the geodemographic profile. So which are the people living in a particular kind of a cluster or type of residential neighborhood. So I think there's a particular research, as I remember, is looking into the kind of a target population within a particular region, which is regarded as kind of a poorer area, for example. Okay, so this could be part of the context of your research as well. Or your research could be based on those people who, based on the time, you may look into consumer behaviors, look into the group of consumers who are visiting stores or pharmacies between a particular time, for example. Okay, so I think the target population, the samples you choose, also gives you an idea on how you can narrow down the context of your research, isn't it? So you can narrow down your research, as we mentioned, based on the industry or sector, or particular kind of organizations, or particular kind of a group of people. So, and I think this is equally kind of help you to link up the whole research topic as a whole now, okay? Because your research topic you set at the beginning and then determines later on, as we said, as part of your research design. So the target population your research is focused on, and which helps you to narrow down to select your samples. After having discussed what is sampling in relation to the other terminologies and why sampling is important, and what kind of sampling within a particular context. So now let's talk about how to select the samples. Yeah. So how do you choose the sample, the representative subset group of the whole population? So according to Saunders, there are two main sampling methods. One is called probability. So as can be seen from Saunders' sampling method diagram, so sampling, there are two main sampling methods, probability and non-probability. So under probability, there are 4 types of probability sampling, and under non-probability, there are equally 4 other non-probability sampling. So probability sampling is also known as random sampling or representative sampling. As Saunders pointed, there are 4 types of sampling methods under probability, which is known as simple random, systematic, stratified, and cluster sampling. So probability sampling methods are normally applied when statistical representative is important for the generalization of your research findings. Yeah, and they are commonly associated with quantitative research like surveys, experiments, or questionnaires you may adopt. And they are usually used for descriptive or explanatory research as reference to the research purposes we discussed before. And normally they are suitable for research questions or objectives where you're required to make statistical generalizations from the samples to your population. Yeah, so statistical and quantitative and then statistically representative are the key words for probability sampling. So let's look at the first probability sampling, which is called simple random sampling. This is very easy to understand. Yeah, it's basically select the samples from the overall population at a random level. Okay, so for example, you look into the images here. There are so many target population that is relevant to your research, for example, within an organization. Yeah, so your random sampling is You just choose them randomly. All right. So the second probability sampling method is known as systematic random sampling. So which is a sampling method involves selecting the sample at regular intervals from the sampling frame. Yeah. So as you can see from this image here, so you select sample at regular intervals, so every third of the population. Yeah. So you choose the third, the sixth, the ninth. All right. So this is called systematic sampling. So the third probability sampling is known as stratified random sampling. So it involves dividing the target population into different strata or segments based on their attributes first. And then you choose them randomly. Yeah. So for example, as the image shown, so you have your target population. You first of all put them in different segments. So you put them in, as a male group, female group, and children group. And then from these three segments or strata, and you are randomly choosing one from the male, one from the female, or one from the children to form as part of your sample. The fourth probability sampling method is known as cluster sampling. So the first one is called one-stage cluster sampling. It's very similar to stratified random sampling, as you divide the target population into discrete groups or segments before the sampling. Yeah, but this is normally happens when there's a heterogeneous group of people happens within your target population. So maybe, for example, you have in the organization, you have target population from different ethnicity group. It's a very diverse ethnicity group. So normally you put them into different ethnicity groups, and then you choose one from each ethnicity group. Okay, so obviously, as we said, it would have groups of chunks of element, and then in that way you ensure the representativeness. Yeah, you include one from each ethnicity group instead of just put them in male female like how you do as a stratified sampling method. Yeah, so cluster sampling is slightly different from stratified sampling method. So because it's more kind of a heterogeneous group, and you ensure each of the group has representative, selected for your sample. So actually beyond the about four probability or random sampling, there's a fifth one which is called multi-stage cluster sampling. Yeah, so which is kind of a different stages, multiple stage of cluster, as we mentioned. So you may, for example, have the first stage of cluster sampling, put all the employees into different ethnicity groups to ensure the representativeness of the samples for your research. And then you may repeat it again. So you may see, oh my God, there's quite a few from Chinese background, a few from English, and the Italians, and Russian, and all sorts. And then you may put them in, for example, in another groups. Maybe you say, oh, you then divide them into different, male, female, and children, for example. Yeah, so this is called multiple stages, kind of a combination of the repeating the different clusters, or could be a combination of the one-stage cluster sampling and the stratified sampling as well. Okay, and depends on the number of samples you have, and you may need to repeat sometimes the cluster sampling using the multi-stage sampling method. So the summary of all the 5 different probability or random sampling methods has been given in Saunders' textbook. So it's worth having a look into whether sampling frame is required, or advantages and disadvantages of them in relation to the cost, or other support would be needed. Okay. I quite like this image. I got it from internet, so which kind of has clearly indicated the differences between the 4 main probability or random sampling methods. And as you can see, as we explained earlier, and I hope this gives you an idea as well. So just to summarize the characteristics of probability or random sampling. So firstly, it's mostly known or used for quantitative research, and it's normally where you're using probability samplings because the population. Yeah, so there's no zero chance you don't know them. And the samples, as we said, need to be statistically representative, and obviously depends on the specific specific method you're using. For example, for stratified or for cluster random sampling, so where you ensure the representativeness of them, aren't you? And normally, choosing the sample has no influence on which element are selected because they are all randomly selected. Yeah, so sample size, if you do use probability sampling for quantitative research, need to be at least 100. Okay, and also the population should be heterogeneous, as we mentioned, or mixed. Yeah, so so in most of the cases, if you look into organizational employees, so sometimes simple random sampling might not be able to give you the representativeness of the sample. So therefore, so we offered and explained quite a few different sampling methods for you to choose the most suitable one, okay, and for the purpose of your research. And then normally for probability sampling, there's a sampling frame normally available, as we said, if you look into organizational employees. So there should be the organization there. You should know, there's an employee list available. Yeah, so you should know the list of the population that is involved in your research or relevant to your research. Yeah, and the non-response must be 0 because there must be somebody who are able to respond to you with at least 100 sample. Okay, so I hope by now you have a better understanding of the probability of random sampling with reference to the 4 or 5 main specific methods. So now let's move on to the non-probability sampling. And as you can see in this diagram, there are also 4 non-probability sampling, which is also known as non-random sampling. So as the Saunders has indicated, there are 4 non-probability or non-random sampling methods, which refers to quota sampling, purposive or judgmental or authoritative sampling, or the third one, volunteer or snowball selection, self-selection sampling, or the fourth one, hazard, convenience or availability sampling. Okay, so non-random or non-probability sampling, as it refers, they are not random, and it is used when the time or other factors than statistical representativeness or generalization is important. Yeah, and they're normally used in qualitative research, such as case studies or exploratory research, where instead of sending out hundreds of questionnaires looking into the statistical representativeness, but you're investigating the individual insight. Yeah, and then this, their understanding of a particular social phenomenon. So obviously, representativeness of the sample that you choose still important, and the generalization may still be possible. For example, if interviewing a leadership style within a particular leader in an organization, but the representativeness of the person you choose still important. Yeah, generalization may still be possible because it may apply to other leaders with the same leadership style, but they are not based on the statistical grounds, yes, based on their views. And then they may involve an element of subjective judgment because as a researcher, you will be part of the research. The way how you phrase the interview question, the way how you interact in the process of conducting the interview might impact the findings as well. Yeah, so it says there might be an element of subjective judgment from you, the way how you interpret the data, the way how you lead or ask the question. But having said that, as an interviewer or researcher, you should try to avoid as much, subjective influence as possible. Okay. So let's look into the specific non-probability sampling method one by one. The first non-probability sampling is known as quota sampling. So quota. So there's quota, yeah? So it's one of the non-random sampling, but normally used for quantitative research instead of qualitative research, like other non-probability sampling, yeah? It is not often used for structured interviews and normally used for large target population as well. So if you can see the image on this slide, so for quota sampling within the organizations and all these kind of employees, yeah, the quota could be the male employees about the age 50. Okay, and I hope that gives you an idea what quota sampling means. Okay, so this is where the subset of the population is underrepresented in the organization. So where you're using the quota. So not looking to the most majority of the employees, but looking at the subset of the employee who are underrepresented. Yeah, and the example here also gives you an idea of quota sampling as well. So if there are 60% blue collar worker and 40% white collar worker, and you're looking for 30 people to be interviewed, So you may have to think about how many people from the 60%, how many people from the 40% to form the 30 participants you would require. Yeah, so it's likely you're getting, using the quota, you're getting 18 from blue collar and 12 from the white collar to make sure, you know, that they are representative and they are the right selection for your sample. Okay, so the second non-probability sampling method is known as purposive sampling. Purposive is also known as judgmental or authoritative sampling. So it is where the sample members are chosen by you as a researcher and based on your knowledge and judgment. Okay, and normally it is used for very small samples when you select the case that particularly informative, and normally there are kind of extreme cases or in a critical cases or typical cases, and as the image showing here, so maybe you as a researcher and how well you know the employees. Yeah, so you may choose the employees you know who are kind of having a very strong, for example, work ethic. Okay, so you use your own judgment to choose these employees. Okay, so and the choice of the subjects who are most advantageously placed or in the best position to provide the kind of information that you would require, because you know these 4 employees are having a very conscientious, having a very good work ethic. So you choose them to help you to understand, you know, the work ethic related issues in organizations. Okay, so that's very judgmental from your knowledge as a researcher. So the third non-probability sampling is known as volunteer sampling, which includes snowball sampling and self-selection sampling. So some other researchers may refer snowball sampling and self-selection sampling individually without having to say they are included under volunteer sampling, but they have the volunteer sampling, you know, nature as well, because as participants, you know, it's kind of a volunteers. They are involved in the research as volunteers. Yeah, so the first snowball sampling is quite easy to understand, isn't it? As the image shows, so if you're looking into the organization related issues, you make contact with 2 of your contacts and contacts 2 people that you know of from 2 different organizations, and then you only reach out to from 2 different organizations, and then you ask each of them to pass on your research to their colleagues within the organization. Yeah, and then their colleagues can roll out, you know, to other colleagues of them in the respective organization. So which is called a snowball, and kind of a rolling in the ball, isn't it? So make more and more people to get engaged in your research. Okay, so self-selection sampling is very it can be known as where you put a poster, for example, advertisement on a notice board somewhere. Okay, just say, you know, this is me, I'm doing research on this topic. If you would like to join in this research, please get in touch. Okay, so this is kind of self-selection. This is where kind of if people would like to take part, they will get in touch with you. Okay, so the fourth non-probability sampling is known as haphazard sampling, which is also known as convenience sampling or availability sampling. Okay, so which is obviously it happens when the sample cases are selected without any obvious principle of organization or in relation to your research. Okay, it's just quite, you know, whoever is available or whoever is convenient or next to you. Okay, so they are conveniently selected. So again, looking into the organization's employees. So for example, if you were to do a research, you may just choose the employees you know of or who share the same office as you. Okay, so which is very convenient, isn't it? Instead of choosing, you know, the people, for example, have to be a particular age or, you know, like a quota one, or select, you know, using a snowball, ask people to roll out, and you just choose the people that you know of or who you are very close to. Okay, so this is called convenience sampling or called availability sampling or haphazard sampling. And again, Saunders has summarized these 4 main kind of non-probability or non-random sampling methods to you, and you can have a look at the differences between them. And again, I found this image on the internet as well. I think it kind of helps you to understand the 4 main different, you know, non-probability sampling methods, which is slightly different from the the standards, kind of the categories, but the way how you select the samples should be quite the same, with different arrows pointing in different directions. Okay, so hope that helps. So the characteristics for non-probability or non-random sampling methods are they are mostly used for qualitative research, as we said, yeah, because you're not looking for a large sample of over 100, because it's just not possible to do. And if it's for qualitative research, as we mentioned, for case studies or interviews, as you probably would need about 10 participants for an interview, for example, and typically small sample size. And as we said, statistical representative is not important, but the individual views. But still, you may still consider the representativeness of the person for the generalization, but not based on the statistical, implication. Yeah, and obviously sample selection is more rigorous or systematic, and then based on the relevant to your topic as well. Okay, so and hopefully by now you understood the difference between random or probability sampling and non-random, non-probability sampling. So I've also come across with this from the internet. I think they're particularly useful for you to understand as a kind of a summative conclusion and the differences between probability and non-probability sampling. And in particular, I think the last few points are vital for you to remember, and that you can also relate them to what we've mentioned in the last few weeks: research design, the philosophical underpinning, and the research design. So for example, probability research, they are very conclusive, unbiased, objective, and look into the statistical significance and can be tested. Yeah, so you believe into the reality, and there's reality there to be found and to be tested. So it can be related to this kind of objective ontology and very positive research paradigm or epistemology, isn't it? And then obviously this is a quantitative research related. Yeah, so obviously for non-probability sampling, they are very exploratory, can be a bit biased because the researchers subjective view might impact on the way how you investigate, collect the data, or analyze the data. But the meaning is kind of generated, yeah, the knowledge generated, negotiated in the process of the research, and then especially qualitative research, isn't it? So, and then it can be also related to the subjectivism ontology and interpretivism epistemology, or the paradigm as well. Okay, so again, so the alignment and the coherence, as you can see now, so they're all bonded together, isn't it? So in not only referring to the research onion, but also in other different stages of research. So there are a few exercises. Obviously, we might not be able to do it as a part of a lecture, but something you can do it after you're listening to this presentation, and think about, all these scenarios. Would you use probability sampling or non-probability sampling, and which specific sampling method you would use? And just, have a go at your leisure, and then just, exercise your understanding of sampling method at your own time. Okay. So sampling method we're talking about is part of the data collection methods. Yeah, so obviously, especially for primary research, if you do primary research, you got to think about the access issues, ethics issues, as we mentioned, or ethics applications as well, and also the sampling methods as well. So how would you select the samples? Is what method you're adopting? So this is something you need to think about. Even when you are doing your proposal, you probably want to use a couple of lines to explain the method, but you don't have to physically select the samples as part of your research proposal. Yeah, but that's part of your final research project. Okay. So lastly, I hope you can listen to the recorded lecture or view the lecture slides in respondents to the core text reading we recommended, and then read through the case studies as well, and hopefully that helps you to understand, and most importantly now connect to your own research. Yeah, think about whether your research is primary or secondary. If your research is primary, so now you have to think about all these access, ethics, and sampling related issues. Okay, so enjoy your research process. It's challenging, but you will get there.